This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
It's Techspert Week at TIFO. Joining us is tech industry professional Jake Palanker. We have much to discuss. Ethical hackers? Are we a simulation? And Hong Kong. With me on the panel are Lori Roggenkamp and Danny Mann.
Yay.
Also, please welcome Dina Friedman. Welcome, Jake.
Hello.
Let me cut to the tech table really quick because they're very handsome this week. It's a handsome selection of young men. All right.
A gaggle.
Thank God it's not the same uggos that we usually have.
I know.
Well, one of them is, so careful.
So digital native hackers with a solid moral compass are taking on bad tech world actors. And we're going to cut to an article in Days Digital. Did you do your homework, Jake? I sent you some.
Of course I did.
Okay, so study up.
Browner.
Right. Generation Z may be best remembered for generating a tipping point between mercenary entrepreneurialism and creative activism. Ethical hacking offers young internet-first communicators the chance to use their powers both for good and for a pretty decent income. So had you heard about this before I sent this to you, Jake?
I've heard of a lot of ethical hacking throughout history, and I can tell you about a lot of different precursors to this movement. But the new one is a lot more interesting, I'd say.
Okay. First, we should say, by way of full disclosure, Jake is my nephew, thus the same last name. And tell us where you're zooming in from.
I am here in San Jose, the capital of Silicon Valley, says their city motto.
Now, I didn't know, the reason I called you a tech industry professional was because I didn't know whether or not we can disclose the site of your soon-to-be new employment.
You can, but he'll have to kill you.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I don't work anywhere yet, but in 3 months, I'll be working for Pure Storage. I think that's neat. I'm excited.
Oh, congratulations.
Very, very cool.
Thank you very
much. If you guys
much.
could get the cursor off his neck, that would be awesome. One of the things I noticed when I'm editing is that, like, you think the cursor is just something that we're seeing during the show, but it burns itself into the. Is it a videotape? What are we making? The digital file, I guess.
I thought I had a mosquito in my glasses.
Beta.
All right, so tell us what you think of the new round of ethical hacking, Jake, and what's been happening.
Yeah, that's so it's important that we say new because a lot of the same-ish kind of stories were written maybe 10 years ago when more millennials were becoming older and reaching internet era and needed employment. So you heard a lot of stories about anonymous and hacktivism, which were a lot more closely tied to unethical hacking. I think the big distinction now is trying to make ethical hacking a mainstream profession more so than just like something you do in your free time. A lot of previous hacktivism kind of movements involved a lot more connections to legitimate crimes where people would do what is actually a federal crime. But, when you hack the Church of Scientology, everyone kind of thinks it's a good thing. Whereas this new movement is trying to find ways where you can use your technical skills to be able to help secure the systems we all depend on. If you find a bunch of vulnerabilities in Dropbox before people who would have tried to steal people's information or data or hold things ransom, you make all of us safer while also, if Dropbox is appreciative enough, you get money in the process. So by disclosing things and vulnerabilities to the companies themselves, you can make the world safer while also making the money that criminals would have gotten previously.
So let's take a step back and go into anonymous a little bit, because I think a lot of people here and a lot of listeners aren't familiar with this movement. And I think the title of the group kind of gives you the idea that nobody was really supposed to know, or they were going to think and behave like one entity, and they were going to collectively decide what was a good thing to do, and then collectively all have that identical viewpoint and do it illegally, but do something that everybody was kind of, or a lot of people were sort of cheering for them to go ahead and do. And so could it get a little bit scary where they would decide that something was a bad thing when others might not agree? Or, well, like there's a vigilantism to it. Like, so
yeah,
tell us a little bit of the history.
Yeah, so Anonymous comes out of Chan culture, 4chan being the most popular at the time, 8chan.
Oh, I thought you were just talking about my friend Robert Chan.
Like all Chans.
Yeah.
That's some excellent
yeah.
culture.
And you're not talking about the 4chan 500.
No.
Oh.
4chan, a website that still exists, 8chan, a site that very recently got taken down.
Yes.
And so maybe there's articles about this.
Bad.
These cultures had a lot of this kind of, we think that we're collectively deciding what's right, what's good, and we are going to act on that regardless of the law. And in many ways in the early internet, they were kind of heroes to some degree, being able to say like, oh, people are doing bad, dumb things and hurting people, and we can maybe step in and prevent that. And the problem is when you have this kind of decentralized group with no real leader, you have a lot more infighting or disagreements or sub parts of it that are far more hardcore and want like, oh yeah, we can hack anyone. It's always good.
It's like it's like people on the fly trying to invent a moral compass. I mean,
right? And there's no specific
degree, but yeah,
there's no specific accountability either. So, you know, there's nothing at stake in terms of like, look now,
what's right or wrong.
Yeah, it's like a plane that's taxiing for over 2 hours. Like in the beginning, everybody's like, let's act civil, and then by the hour and a half, you're like, I'm gonna just lock myself in the bathroom. I don't give a crap what anybody else thinks.
Because I don't want a limbo in the aisle with those people.
All right, let's talk for a moment about HackerOne, which is, like what Jake was describing, is an organized company whose job is to be hired by other organized companies and say, please, hack away and find our vulnerabilities. In other words, try to break us, and then that way we'll know where we're weak.
That's amazing.
So founded in 2012, HackerOne is the world's largest white cap hacking directory, working with 300,000 staff across 150 countries. In just one day this year, 45 of its Singapore-based hackers came together to uncover 264 vulnerabilities in Dropbox and its associates' security firewalls. The event set a powerful example not only for the future of ethical hacking, but for our ability to beat the bad hackers at their own game. HackerOne CEO Martin Mikos said, and I believe he probably said this in an accent, these hackers will grow up with a clearer moral compass as to issues in the digital realm. So
nice accent.
So I maybe like he's Dutch. I don't know, because there's like lots of little interesting figures over the A's, and some of them are in italics. Jake, everything Cambridge Analytica did was legal. Is legislation lagging behind digital capabilities to misuse data?
I think that's a great question. I'm going to real quick say a little. People say all the time now that data is the new oil, in that we have all these companies suddenly emerging where really the thing that they do is they take people's data and they try to find ways to monetize this. And a lot of capital is being poured into these companies. If data is the new oil, we eventually had to break up and set rules on Standard Oil. Eventually, the monopolies and the criminal practices had to be broken up and the government had to step in. The question is, what does that look like, and when does it help people? When does it not? I think that in Europe, the EU has Gdpr, which is aimed to try to protect our users' privacy online and users' control over their own data they're generating. And in a lot of ways, that makes European internet safer and easier to use and better for the people. But it's also written by lawyers and old people, and there's
nice
a degree
grouping.
I don't know any of those.
There's a degree to which, even if it's well intended, if you don't really understand the consequences of what you say, GDPR might not even be enforceable.
And carry a big stick.
Does anyone on our panel have questions for Jake? Because he is a smarty pants.
I have a question. I always, like, anytime anybody talks about people collecting data, it's always a bad thing. But I feel like, to me, in my opinion, like, I think it's great. Like, I guess I just don't understand how. I mean, I guess I could understand if it's used in an awful way, but like to steal somebody's identity or something. But like, if Instagram wants to market swoveralls, which are sweatpant overalls to me, which are amazing.
Bring it.
I mean, I'm all for it. I would love, like I love the fact that like anytime I think or Google or do anything, it pops up on my, all of my browsers and stuff, because it's like, great. Now I don't have to like, go too far out, and I can get different options and stuff. So I guess why are people so upset about that? I feel like it's actually just making life easier.
Well, I think if it's used against them somehow, then it becomes a bad thing. If it's used criminally against them somehow.
Yeah, but it's...
If money is taken from them or...
But that's what I'm saying. It's like, obviously that's bad.
Right.
But it's like, I feel like the Cambridge Analytica stuff, I mean, I don't know too much about it. From the gist that I understood, it's like they just use that to figure out like people's like political ideas and then sort of market articles to them based off their political ideas. It's like, well then...
But it's worse than that, Lori. It's like they kind of figure out which people are a little bit insecure and which people might be like, I kind of like brownish people, but not all the way. And then those people are vulnerable. So it's just like, no, we hate them. You guys, they just strung up like a 3-year-old by his toes. And so brownish people, bad. So Am I describing this properly, Jake? I mean, like they drive wedges, like they find the vulnerabilities and they just drive the wedge. And like, oh, if you're teetering on like maybe not the most
it's used
tolerant...
insidiously. It's used for people's purposes.
It's more like undecided.
I'll jump in real quick and try to answer that. And I'll first do a good example of where I think...
Good.
When we
Try
say data
and figure
collection,
out what the question is in that.
First, I'll do a small puppet show of it.
I want you to tell me what I was going to ask
what?
you. I want you to tell me what I was going to ask you.
What you were going to ask me?
No, he can't because I interrupted you.
Oh, sorry. Never mind. Just answer the question.
No, so I have an example of data collection being not just useful and beneficial, but necessary, right? I'm skipping ahead in the reading, but there's a California law that's been proposed, and one of the goals of it is to say that if we don't, a company has to say provide the same level of a service for you, even if they don't collect your data, and that's a noble goal to some degree. But if I'm trying to give you directions on how to go somewhere, I need to know where you are, right? Facebook doesn't always need to know where I am, right? That's not necessary to let me see dumb people's posts and read
Maybe
stuff.
they just miss you.
They miss you.
If I'm trying to go from one part of the city to another, that application needs to know where I am, right? Data collection isn't always bad. And it's also not only, it's not always bad, but it's also not only like insidious uses that are putting people in danger. An example that's very old school, it involves in the mail coupons. Has, I think it was Target or Walmart or some big corporation, based on someone's purchasing habits, detecting that they think that she is pregnant and that they are going to send her coupons related to the fact that she's going to have a baby soon. This is kind of, to some degree, like what capitalism does, is it tries to find audiences and market to it perfectly. But this woman, she doesn't know she's pregnant. She's also 17 and living at home.
Whoa.
This is a dangerous situation for her to have her
it's a
family.
TV
I saw
movie.
that episode.
Yeah.
Before she was.
Right.
And B, through a corporation.
Yeah, I think that was
trying to sell her goods.
I think that was a Lifetime show called Target Told My Parents I'm Pregnant.
Or it was an episode of The Hills, one of the two.
So, at present, the internet thinks I'm obsessed with sneakers and backpacks. The internet is correct.
I was going to say.
So what if like a political engine decided to try to convince me that Democrats hate sneakers and want to burn all of them?
I was just going to say, what happens if Joe Biden came out and said that anybody who wears backpacks supports fascism? Would you be like, oh, no?
So it's kind of like what I'm saying, Jake, is it's like one thing, like Lori was saying, it's like one thing when it's marketing, it's like, yes, I do enjoy looking at backpacks. Thank you. And it's another thing if you're going to use it politically to sort of sway how our society decides what laws. But
not everybody's going to agree on the boundaries and the criteria. So that becomes another issue. What one person thinks is right, another person maybe doesn't.
Yeah, but I'm always right. That's the thing.
Well, that's a starting point. That helps.
They have like mugs and T-shirts. I think that you could buy that say that.
I do. I have.
You have those already.
Yeah.
All right, Jake. Go ahead and make your point.
Quick question for Jake. So, just going back to the ethical, the current rise of ethical hacking.
I love that. Hackerism. Hacktivism.
Well,
hacktivism.
Hacktivism. I don't know if that still applies.
It definitely defines anonymous and such.
Right. So I guess my question is, how does that speak to the current, like the generation that is growing up to kind of take advantage of this? Does it speak to like a certain optimism? I mean, is it a natural outcropping of the fact that, like, you know, kids have just been around this technology since they were like the day they were born, basically? Or
yeah, I would say that a lot of what kids these days are being basically born with is a high degree of technical literacy. Not necessarily computer science savvy, like that's a very different different perspective, like it's a very different set of skills. But like when you grow up in a world that's very much run by computers, you learn that those things, those systems are significantly going to affect your life, right? Whereas when people have their childhoods not really that run by computers and you slowly see them doing more and more stuff, you go, wow, that's neat, that's cool. But when you don't know anything else, right? That's kind of our baseline to some degree, is kids growing up with like, oh, every system is run by computers. The idea of something being on paper is inherently archaic. You realize that whether or not you yourself have a high degree of understanding of how those systems work, you realize that they're incredibly important.
That's the language you learned. That's your basics.
Exactly. It's just something that becomes.
Those are your blocks and your rotary dials.
Like if this, then that. Yeah.
Your what?
Sorry.
So Jake, talk for a moment about the convention in Las Vegas of hackers that coalesced in an effort to try and break into voting systems. And like, what do you know about that? And do you think that that's helping us? And those were all volunteers. I assume that wasn't a company.
None of them paid to register.
They did not.
Yeah, so you're talking about DEF CON, which happens every year.
Right.
It's one of the most popular, I wouldn't say it's hacking as much as security, but also hacking to some degree, conferences. And basically, when you know computer systems well, you know that there's some tasks that they really can do reliably and some that you can't. And voting via electronic systems is a terrible idea. There's almost no computer scientists in the world who would tell you, oh, yes, we have a great electronic voting system and it's going to work well and it's going to work securely, who's not working for a company or a startup trying to sell you an electronic voting machine, right? And those people aren't inherently lying as much as way over optimistic about the scenario. So people trying to break into these systems aren't saying, haha, we're trying to hijack democracy. We're saying, no. If we do this in advance enough, if we can show you that these systems are broken, maybe you'll replace them by the time election day comes along, right? If we can break all the terrible things you make fast enough, maybe you won't be legally allowed to use them and have to use pen and paper ballots, which are still the best ballots in the world.
I love this.
But that's like, you guys then have to look at a piece of paper, and you just told me that it's unfamiliar to you. Archaic. Go ahead, Danny.
I love the overriding concept here, the umbrella idea of like catch me if you can, where if something isn't working, find a guy who has committed a crime against that thing, hire him to come in and fix the system so people like him won't be able to do that.
It's called turning a spy.
Yeah.
I mean,
I just started watching White Collar, which is basically that. And my girlfriend was like, why are you doing that? It's not going to help you in any way. So to my girlfriend, I want to say, suck it. It's helping me right now. You're dumb. I'm smart.
Our show's all about love.
I love you. I like her edge.
So, Jake, there are signs that concerns about privacy are getting public attention and beginning to affect policy, as we were discussing earlier. A California digital privacy law taking effect in 2020 will grant consumers, and this is something you alluded to earlier, grant consumers the right to know what information companies are collecting about them, why they are collecting that data, and with whom they are sharing it. This gives consumers the right to tell companies to delete their information as well as to not sell or share their data. Businesses must still give consumers who opt out the same quality of service. However, they probably do it like with a middle finger raised. It also makes it more difficult to share or sell data on children younger than 16. So just because, they have to give you the same service, if it's sort of like if someone comes over to your house and says, I don't really like what you cooked, but I'll sit here and talk to people.
I didn't do that the other night.
No.
Oh.
No. But is there something, like, what is the guarantee that we're all getting the same service? If you've chosen to opt out, are they still going to give you identical service?
That's a great question. And part of what always scares me about legislation like this is there's a term that a legislator can write, such as same quality of service, and then you give that document to the team that builds, for example, the advertising recommendation algorithms at Google, and they would have no idea what you mean. There are legislative ways that we can try to approach these problems in terms of goals, but when you write a law that's just a goal that we want, how do you make that the law?
It's
right?
too idealistic, right?
And so when you put in the very specific, such as right to be forgotten laws that say, oh, you must delete all my data if I ask you to, that is actionable. That is something we can put into law and make, it can protect a lot of people. But if we just say, oh, you have to do as good of a job for people who aren't generating as much advertisement revenue, like that's a significantly more difficult standard to hold people to. And the example with the maps previous is a little sketchy, but if I don't know where you are, I, as a company that tells you where you're going, can't do as good of a job. So there's services that inherently require this collection. And if we end up with a system where it's just, oh, in order to, the government says you have to tell the people what you're doing with their data. If everyone on Facebook tomorrow gets a giant thing that says, oh, here's exactly what you're doing with their data, and then a button that says, do you agree or not? And if you disagree, you're off Facebook. And if you agree, it's fine. Most people are just going to click agree. Telling people what's happening to their data doesn't necessarily make people make better choices.
No, we've been clicking agree for a long time.
The effects of our actions.
Yeah. All right. So, Jake, are most people your age paying any attention to how their data is being used, or have they willingly sold their privacy for face tuning and dog ears?
That's a great question. And I love your specific example because those examples with the dog ears and such require facial recognition technology. And to some degree, everyone about my age has settled to the fact that at least two multinational corporations probably have a perfect 3D model of our faces somewhere, right? Even if you're not on Facebook, if you're friends with enough people on Facebook, Facebook has a perfect recognition system to specify your face. So there's things like that where we just kind of are very nihilistic about it and say, oh, there's no hope. Some things are just out there. But on the other hand, my friends and I all communicate via this encrypted app called Signal, where basically we're using, if it were a company, they'd say military grade technology to secure our messages. But it's just standard practice to make sure that no one is listening in on our group chats or what we're saying to each other. And I think that some people are really looking for these kind of easy solutions that make privacy just better. Like, why should all my messages go directly to Mark Zuckerberg as well as whoever I'm actually sending them to, right?
Now,
why should Mark see all the
these
things
are safer pigeons?
That's my question is why does that matter? It's like, are you planning to bomb, anything? Are you planning to kill? Like, I feel like one of the things is I have an Alexa and everybody keeps telling me, oh, you shouldn't have that. It's listening to your recordings. And I was like, well, if it wants to listen to me watch White Collar, then it can go ahead and do that. But I mean, I'm not doing anything important in there.
Why are you watching that?
Yeah. And so I feel like it's sort of like an extra step. To me, it's an extra step for no purpose because it's like they're going to get your information and they're going to get your data no matter what you do. So it's like, why even fight it?
So
I think fighting though at least opens the discussion on it, so it's not just happening like a wildfire. Like there's some attempt to put it out. There's a couple of people, with hoses. It's trying to contain something that otherwise will just be.
But see, that's my question: is what is it trying to contain? Like for me personally,
boundaries and rules of some kind.
But see, for me personally, I feel like the only people it's benefiting are the people who are committing crimes. Like if I have nothing, I'm doing nothing in my life, right? So if people want to listen in on what I'm doing, kudos. But like, let's say, that stops and then my next, 20 years ago, my next door neighbor was caught with basically a whole artillery full of weapons, right? What happens if somebody had him on a phone call and they were like, well, we can't use this because the data is secure, or they couldn't get access to his phone? I feel like, it's basically stopped being able to stop crime, essentially.
But it's not just about crime, Lori. It's about them knowing too much about you. Like I was hearing about how your mouse can detect if you have a neurological disorder or something, and then maybe some company wouldn't hire you because they knew too much about your medical history just based on how you hold your mouse. So,
oh, really?
Well, there's just a lot that they can know about us that might reach a level where even Lori would go oh wait, I don't need you guys to know that.
It's a sword that cuts two ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I think some people are concerned that there's a slippery slope, and that maybe maybe you don't necessarily have an issue about anything that's happening right now, but we're sort of headed in the direction where things are only going to get.
I think it's
You're
like
just obsessed with women who murder.
I think it's like any rules, though. Like you throw a bunch of them out there, and some of them aren't going to work, but some of them stick. It's like traffic laws. At first, people were just running into each other. Then somebody put a stop sign. Then all of a sudden, there were electronic lights. There's still accidents, but by increments.
Like they tried to do that traffic light or that traffic camera, but then that was causing accidents.
Right.
So then they ended up having to stop doing that.
Well, because
mostly.
I would stop for hair and makeup, so it's a disturbance.
Yeah.
Was that you?
Yeah, sorry. And so there's a point where we're like, yeah, I don't care what they know. I don't do anything. I don't care what they know. And then all of a sudden they know a thing about you, and you're like, I didn't want you guys to know that.
I had an accident, but I look great.
Okay.
Jakey wants to.
Yeah, I want to really quickly jump in with maybe this will resonate with people who are more scared of the current administration as opposed to people who aren't. But right now, all the things that I do are pretty legal and well accepted, right? But we've been in periods of history where being Jewish was acceptable, and then that went into being Jewish is no longer acceptable, right?
Yeah, it went
we
into
don't
remission.
know what the future will say is okay or not. So if Facebook knows I'm Jewish, right? That's just true. It's out there. If someone goes out and buys, if the future dystopian government taps into Facebook, they know I'm Jewish, right? But it's a good example of like, there's lots of things in my life that I think are okay, that I think are not just like morally acceptable, but that the government and no one really is looking to try to lock me up. But that might change. We never know what the future will hold. And to some degree, it's what the right always gets really, really upset about when we talk about a gun registry, right? And I think that's a little bit less reasonable because guns are incredibly dangerous, whereas being Jewish isn't incredibly dangerous in my perspective. But we never do know, who will have this data in the future and what they will want to do with it.
I'll give you another example, Jake. Your mother, who's a very emotionally stable person, the way that we all have our coping mechanisms for the Trump regime. We all have different methodology for getting through and for keeping ourselves relatively sane. And for my sister Amy, she responds to Trump's tweets with a very simple all caps, fuck you.
That's the way to go.
If this data is being collected in the 24th year of the Trump regime, they'll find her.
Yeah, they'll get all the way down to
down to
Amy.
The thing about
They'll be like, we've got
alphabetically, they may find her in year 22.
the thing about privacy is that once you give it up, it's really hard to get it back. So whatever we're giving to corporations and to our government, we're most likely not going to receive.
I'm sorry
back
to laugh
again.
I don't know why. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to laugh when you were saying something made really good sense. It's just that you sounded like a Valley girl when you said it. You're like,
That's just how I
Give
sound.
it up. It's hard take. Give it
That's
up.
how I.
Okay.
That's how I.
So like privacy?
I'm so sorry. It was a very, very, very smart point.
It's like,
Now,
you're not taking my princess phone, Mom.
Now, if you
because
say
you'll
it,
never
Bridget-
give it back.
I don't appreciate the misogyny associated with making fun of female
I'm sorry.
voice
Everything
patterns.
you're saying is great.
Now, if she had said privacy,
Privacy.
as the Brits would.
I have a question for Jake. So I have a big pet peeve day, which is daylight saving time. And
Right.
daylight saving
Boom.
daylight saving time to me, because everybody says daylight savings time, and articles are written in it. It really frustrates me. So do you have that level of hate for whenever anybody posts like a thing on Instagram or Facebook, like, this is letting you know that you can't take my information and I am officially giving notice? Do you go like, oh, the rage?
What's that got to do with daylight savings time?
Because that's my
just
anger.
trigger
button.
alert.
Yeah.
What, it depends on what time they complain about. Yeah.
I had completely forgotten those existed.
I'm sorry I
I've been
reminded
off
you.
social media for so long that I forgot those were a thing, and they make me so happy. So I'd say that I've got so angry that those existed that I now find them funny enough. So I actually enjoy them.
You circled back
all right.
around.
So we've come to acceptance.
Okay.
Very good. All right, we're going to break for commercial, and we will be right back to talk about this big philosophical quandary.
Dun, 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 dun.
Are we a simulation?
Hello, my name is Jacob.
And I'm his co-host, 5-year-old Olivia.
Do you have kids?
And are your kids curious?
If you answered yes, you should check out Curious Kid Podcast, a weekly educational podcast for curious kids and grown-ups. Every week we learn about another topic.
We've already learned about spider webs, batteries, the moon, and so much more.
You can find us at CuriousKidPodcast.buzzsprout.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yay. I love those two.
Oh my God, that kid is so adorable.
All right, so
cute.
Jake, you've heard of this
So cute.
technological / philosophical dilemma. Are we a simulation? Please click on link, gentlemen. Dan Fink writes, what if everything around us, the people, the stars overhead, the ground beneath our feet, even our bodies and minds, were an elaborate illusion? What if our Earth were simply a hyper-realistic simulation with all of us merely characters in some kind of sophisticated video game? If we are living in a simulation, then the cosmos that we are observing is just a tiny piece of the totality of physical existence. Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom said in a 2003 paper that jump-started the conversation about what has come to be known as the simulation hypothesis. While the world we see is in some sense real, it is not located at the fundamental level of reality. So then, if we're taking this hypothesis to its logical conclusion, God is a 15-year-old girl named Asteroid playing The Sims.
Jeez.
So, Jake, what are your thoughts?
This might be a little bit contentious, but I think it's more reasonable an idea than most of the other ideas we've had throughout history.
Oh, you mean like
we
in
thought
religious
that the Earth
concepts?
was on the back of a big turtle, and I don't think it is. We thought that, there's some divine creator who built everything just for us, and maybe that is true. In my opinion, that's more likely to be a computerized simulation than it is to be some kind of extra some kind of fantastical creator.
The flat Earth thing was fun.
I love the flat Earth thing. Don't even get me started. I
Well,
think I
see,
already
when
ranted on this
when
podcast
you
in a previous
play The
episode.
Sims, you can have your sim by a computer and play The Sims. So we may be a simulation of a simulation of a simulation, which would be the opposite of computer learning. Am I right, Jake? It would be computer unlearning, like we're slowly devolving.
I wouldn't say that's devolving as much as it's kind of beautiful in that if we are a simulation, right? For sake of argument, we're already building simulations in this simulation.
But did we build them, or did the person who built us to build them?
What would be the difference? What would that look like for us? If everything's a simulation, I'm the same as I was before.
My goal is to keep everyone up at night.
This is when the kids get stoned and Donald Sutherland is trying to explain that we're not on the pin of a needle, and that's
Exactly.
like it's always been this discussion.
I was thinking about this last night after I finished watching White Collar. And I was thinking about this, and I was like, you know what? I feel like, because simulation is is deception. It's simulating something, right? It's the act of pretending, and it's, don't you like sort of, there's like that phrase, fake it till you make it. So I feel like in a way we're all simulating or pretending or practicing like how we think we should portray ourselves to the outside world. So in a way, yeah, I think that you could consider it a simulation. It's like what you are in your own head is never what you are outside. And I think that to me, I think that's how I view this.
But if you recognize the difference, then I think you're kind of on board. You're anchored.
Yeah, but I don't think, I don't think it's any grand, I mean, in my opinion, in my view of life, I don't think there's any grand cause. I think it's just that we're organisms that evolved into something else, and now, and this is how we live, and then we don't live anymore after a certain period of time, and then that's it. So,
If you, in The Sims, though, your sim can take that little potion that keeps them young.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so we need to simulate that.
In life, that's tequila.
If you were told that you could live forever, but you had to have your head, it was only your head in a jar, like a Futurama kind of thing, would you do it?
I would not.
I think I would.
I saw that movie.
Yeah.
But you have such a nice head.
I do. I have a very nice head.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we're always like looking for an answer, and I think it scares us to think that like it's totally random and absurd, and like there's no reason
we make stuff up to deal with reality.
Yeah,
Yeah, Michelle McNamara, who's Patton Oswalt's late wife, who was a very well-known crime writer, and she wrote that about the Golden State Killer. She used to have a saying where she would say, like, life is chaotic, just be nice. And I think that is pretty much my philosophy.
Yeah, and that doesn't really that provides you with, like, no guidance whatsoever. And, like, most people have no idea where to take that.
But most people are out trying to find an answer that works for them.
Right.
Well, yeah.
And not everybody comes up with the same answer, so you end up with these groups.
Yeah.
Right, which we call organized religion. But really, what's the difference between organized religion and a cult? Organized religion is a cult that kind of lasted. Because like a lot of religions, when you break them down, they sound pretty crazy.
Yeah, because organized religion provided enough of an explanation and enough guidance that people were like, okay, I'll take it.
Somebody once said that I forgot where I heard this, but they said that the difference between organized religion and a cult is that the leader of the organized religion died, is no longer around. The leader of the cult is still alive.
Until...
Plus, religion has better hours.
Yeah.
Religion has better... Well, I think a good religion is a religion that doesn't... It does have better hours. Yeah, it doesn't ask you to give up all of your material possessions and your entire life and stop communicating with your family in order to be a member of the religion. That's a good religion.
And look at, I'm Jewish, and I think Judaism kind of stands out in how there's like, Judaism like offers a lot of answers. Answers.
Doesn't a lot of religion come from Judaism?
I guess, but I mean, I don't know anything except for Judaism. I can't answer any.
Judaism is a good religion for us in its reformed version,
right?
But there's Judaism light, which we have, but
only half the calories.
A lot of religions don't have the light version. You're either in or you're jumped out. Or you have to jump yourself out.
I think most of them do have
different grades. To get them to stop
grades.
calling. So there's a meeting and we didn't see you. And Judaism is like, we don't care if you come to temple or not. But if you were in the ultra-Orthodox sect.
Right, the Orthodox Jews,
they would care.
They care, yeah. But you can do, I think the religions that last, there is some leeway.
They're the ones that bend
like
with time, that
yeah.
grow with people.
One of the things I find interesting about Judaism is I feel like Judaism... Being Jewish more than any other religion is more of an ethnicity than anything, too. It's like if somebody was like, I'm Jewish, you're like, okay. I know. But like you can be Irish Catholic, you can be Italian, you can be all sorts. But if like it's sort of like you're just one.
Well, my new religion is going to be called Asterism, and that's where we pray to Asteroid, the 15-year-old who's playing The Sims. She is our god. Yeah, and so if you need to go to the bathroom, she will click on you and you can go.
Okay.
But now she knows where you are.
If you believe. You have to believe.
See, I thought this was like we were all characters from... Because I could believe that. Because whenever I had to play video games with my brother, they always gave me like the character with like the lowest amount of points, and so I feel like I'm that person for whoever's playing the game is like, you're gonna get Lori. She's a special
you were the last
ed aide.
one picked.
Yeah, she's a special ed aide who lives in Anaheim with her aunt. Like you're gonna get. It's like, aw,
she's also on a hell of a lot of podcasts, and I think she's wicked awesome.
Is she potting around?
Yes. So we're gonna jump to what's Twitter trending right now, and this was given to me by my nephew Jake, who's on the show with us today. What's Twitter trending is the Hong Kong protesters who are using laser pointers and other more old school means to disarm facial recognition software. Here's a Twitter thread from one of my heroes, activist Joshua Wong, and he wrote, from 9 June until now, police arrested 833 citizens. 136 of them were prosecuted, including 15 activists from the age of 12 to 15. One of them is just a primary school student. Jeez. And before we jump into this, because Jake's kind of fascinated with what the protesters and activists in Hong Kong have been getting up to in order to defend and protect themselves. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a historical background on Hong Kong, which a lot of people in America are not completely up to speed on. So in 1842, China cedes Hong Kong to the British after the First Opium War. Over the decades, thousands of Chinese migrants flee unrest in China and settle in the colony of Hong Kong. 1898, China leases the new territories together with 235 islands to Britain for 99 years from July 1st. In the 1970s, Hong Kong was established as an Asian tiger, one of the region's economic powerhouses with a thriving economy based on high technology industries. In 1984, as we approach the handover back to China, Britain and China sign a joint declaration on the conditions under which Hong Kong will revert to Chinese rule in 1997. Under the one country, two systems formula, Hong Kong will become part of one communist-led country but retain its capitalistic economic system and partially democratic political system for 50 years after the handover. In 1997, July, Hong Kong is handed back to the Chinese authorities after more than 150 years of British control. Tung Chi-hua, a Shanghai-born former shipping tycoon with no political experience, is handpicked by Beijing to rule the territory following the takeover. From this point onward, China continues to incrementally squeeze the democracy out of Hong Kong, and the people of Hong Kong push back. 2004, July, some 200,000 people mark the 7th anniversary of Hong Kong's handover to Chinese rule by taking part in a demonstration protesting Beijing's ruling against electing the next chief executive by universal suffrage. Britain accuses China of interfering in Hong Kong's constitutional reform process in a manner inconsistent with the self-governance guarantees agreed upon before the handover. And now we're up to date. 2019, June through July, anti-government and pro-democracy protests erupt into violent clashes with police after China proposes extraditing suspected criminals to mainland China, where we all know they would get disappeared. And I wanted to focus for a moment on Joshua Wong. So this is a documentary I watched a couple years ago, and 2017 documentary now available on Netflix called Joshua, Teenager versus Superpower, tells a story of how kids fought back in Hong Kong when communist propaganda was introduced into their school curriculum. Joshua's political party, Demosisto, is among several youth groups, all of which have their roots in the 2014 Umbrella Movement, playing a big role in the protest against the extradition bill, which have been ongoing for weeks. Joshua represents the century of free thinking that has taken root and blossomed in Hong Kong. What is unfolding is a battle between the independent ingenuity and authoritarian rule. And you take the story from here, Jake, because I know that you're very interested in how the protesters have been organizing.
Yeah, and I think your characterization that to some degree these are kids who are fighting against China is really important. A lot of the people who are in the current protesting movement are students, and they go back to school in a week, and we'll see how that affects the movement as it goes forward. But for those of you who don't know, China has one of the most, I'd say, impressive, if it weren't so terrifying, police state surveillance systems involving facial recognition scanning and tracking all of their citizens. So if we're trying to talk about, privacy and the rights of an individual in a big technological system, China uses a ton of modern tools to suppress their people to some degree, or maybe the people in their country that they don't like. And so while not as excessive in Hong Kong, a lot of that technology is being used or feared to be used. So a lot of the movements, a lot of the actions of the protesters in Hong Kong are trying to keep that in mind and figure out how they can keep their people safe from retaliation from the government. So they used laser pointers to block the sensors of a camera. So if you have a camera at a long distance, say a security camera or a traffic camera, whatever it is, the government has that footage and they can go through either live or far after trying to piece together who was at this protest. Can we find out who they were? Can we go arrest them? So protesters used laser pointers, just standard laser pointers, or even really powerful ones, to block the cameras for long enough that someone could go, slap tape on it or spray paint over it. And even to some degree, people have been cutting down poles that have cameras on them. They've also been asking people not to photograph the protesters directly, or at least to do so from a distance or blur faces, because even if you're not a part of the state surveillance tool, if you take a picture of you and your friends having fun at a protest, or even just try to be a journalist and be like, here's what's happening in Hong Kong, and then you post that to the internet, the government gets their hands on valuable information to them. How can they identify these people? So a lot of the actions going on in Hong Kong right now are kind of modeling what future protests will look like in a really technologically advanced society. When there are all these tools and there is all this data gathering, how can we fight against it while protesting?
It's so interesting because last week when we did our show about education, tech in the classroom, someone cracked a joke about laser pointers in terms of it being like a very low tech.
Well, during the eBay show, it was the first thing ever sold on eBay was a broken laser
the broken
pointer.
laser.
Right. But we were just joking around about like, oh, what are you using? What technology are you using in the classroom? And somebody was like, oh, laser pointers, right? But this very low tech item is being used in this context to fight, the technology.
Can you explain, Jake, how the laser pointer interrupts the work of the camera?
The laser.
So a camera is basically just a tiny little dot that absorbs light and then turns that into electrical signals, right? In the same ways that our eyes work. So if I shine a laser pointer at your eye, it's not that it's not really that like I've made your eye stop working. It's that I've overwhelmed your eye with light. There's so much green or red or whatever light that you can't really see anything else. In fact, if you do it for too long, it's really dangerous. And the same thing happens with the camera. They don't permanently break like an eye might. But if you shine a laser directly at its sensors, you can overwhelm them. And that gives other activists time to go and cover it up more permanently in some way. And also, the laser pointers, when not being used for, disrupting cameras or just being shined menacingly at riot police, they end up being a really powerful visual metaphor because the government tried to ban and classify laser pointers as like a highly dangerous weapon. And that was hilarious because they're laser pointers. So they got as many of them as they could into the country as fast as possible. So these protests, there's huge numbers of people, all with laser pointers. So they'll end up they'll shine their laser pointers basically at anything they hate or anything they're trying to protest against. So you'll end up with these buildings, these government buildings covered in little green dots. And each little dot is nothing. But if everyone in a huge crowd has all these laser pointers, you can cover the entire side of a building in like beautiful
the
lights.
dots.
So
it's so amazing how resourceful.
Yeah, I suggest we look at the video right now if we can. Just it's of a coordinated effort to try to bring down a camera that the government claims isn't being used to observe, but they think is.
How did they bring it down, Jake?
They sawed it.
They sawed it?
Yeah,
laser saw?
Yeah, laser saw.
They hacked at it.
They used they used hacktivism.
Please know in China they don't have the internet that we enjoy. They have their own Facebook, their own Twitter. I guess they've taken our technology and they've kind of like duplicated it. But I know that from a friend of mine who tours with the Beach Boys that when you go to China, you turn in your phone and then you get it when you come back. Like you don't. Yeah, as far as I know, you don't go into China with a phone that connects to the regular internet. You can only. What do you know about it, Devin?
Yeah, a friend of mine's wife is actually Chinese, and he went there a couple months ago. He had to like completely cut off contact. He couldn't use his phone at all. Like, no internet, no nothing. He had to go radio silent his entire time over there because the government won't let you actually have contact with the outside world, basically.
So they don't know they don't know in China, in mainland China, they don't know what's going on in Hong Kong, but they do in Taiwan because Taiwan is also an independent.
I'm sure you could like find ways to like VPN or something like that to get out of there, but most people don't only know what like the government tells them.
So
for the most part.
What do you know, Jake, about what people do know, or is there any kind of radio-free information that's getting in?
Yeah, so people know that there's protests happening. It's just framed as terrorism or, people who are trying to destroy the glory of the Chinese Republic. People often are being told that it is a British or American influence trying to subvert the glorious People's Republic of China. So it's not that people in China don't know that something's happening. It's that they have a very regimented set of things opinions they can have or are being told
propaganda
about an event. So it's really actually important that we think about like, oh, they're not in the dark. They're in a completely different world.
They're in a bubble.
It's
a
not
bubble.
Being uneducated. They're being specifically educated.
Propaganda bubble.
Another different kind of echo chamber.
People who are living in the United States but are Chinese of Chinese nationality or follow Chinese news end up having completely different opinions about the Hong Kong protests, despite the fact that they can watch whatever media they want to now, right? They're not just stuck to the state government's
well, it's like the difference between Fox News and other news stations.
So
you know,
it's just that this is the ideology that they're choosing because it suits their lifestyle and what they need to do to survive. So it's like humans tend to adapt to what is necessary to survive. So you're saying that if my mom lived in China and I lived here, I could have a conversation with her, and it would be like talking to someone's mom who listens to Rush Limbaugh. Like,
yes,
are we really doing this? Okay, is that what it's like, Jake? I mean, because people do talk to relatives in China, correct?
Yeah, I mean, people. If you were talking to someone there or someone who follows the state line but is here, it's not really like they're, just really uneducated. They just have a very specific point of view that doesn't really mesh with the evidence that you have, right? And we see that a lot in different bubbles within our own country.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but in the Chinese authority, are they concerned that what's happening in Hong Kong could catch on, or are there any dissidents within mainland China? Like, can you survive as a dissident for more than 24 hours without being rounded up?
Oh, so I wouldn't say at all that China's not worried, right? China is taking very aggressive and swift action. It's just that they're very confident in the powers of their state media and state control. So it's not to say that they're not worried in that, they see that as a concern and they're taking action to make sure it doesn't happen. But I have no doubt that it's not like I do not think that there are going to be any mainland solidarity movements with Hong Kong.
So
not because they can't tell that Hong Kong is protesting, but because they are actively mad at Hong Kong for protesting in a large part.
Can I just say that when I was a kid, I always wondered if on Sunday nights Chinese people went out for Jewish food.
Oh, they do.
I just had that image that there was like an exchange program.
I think that.
I have a question. What is it? Is England doing anything about this? Is the UN doing anything about this, or are they sort of just like, it's China's problem now?
Well, Trump wishes them all the best.
Yeah. I mean, I know that he's sending his love.
They already have a wall.
Yeah. So he's okay with that. He's fine.
That's a great question, though, because usually when this kind of stuff is happening, you see, like, for example, the protesters are kind of to some degree talking about American intervention and trying to get that. I wouldn't say that they all agree on that. And I also definitely don't think that they're getting it right now.
No.
So actual serious question in the pictures, what is the significance of the umbrellas? I was not privy to this.
I'm not sure if Ukraine did it first. Who started the first umbrella protest? It was either...
Oh, I thought that was just because I always heard that they don't like the sun. So I thought they were just blocking themselves.
I think that's just one Chinese girl, but if there's many in a protest, I think there's something more.
It looks great from a drone.
Yeah, the first Hong Kong protest was referred to as the umbrella protest.
Right.
I do not remember its significance.
Yeah, Ukraine did the same, and so I'm just not sure which one. Maybe someone can call in.
Maybe they just like those little drinks.
It might be to keep their identities from cameras.
Oh, okay.
Or like battle weight tear gas or something.
Right.
I know they're using
that's
like
true.
rackets now to hit the cans back, but it might be like a surveillance thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many good reasons.
I know.
I was just like, they don't like the
It's a top 10 list.
Yeah.
And number 2.
So we're going to jump to Facebook feed time right now, and I think it's apropos. This comes in from Lucinda Williams, and she writes, she simply wrote this: how do I get off Facebook? Now, Jake, she used Facebook to pose the question, so how do I escape this cult? And she received 162 comments.
That's like asking somebody at Scientology, how do I leave?
How do I
get out?
Well, you phone the phone company to disconnect your phone, so it's not completely radical.
That kind of stuff.
Thank you for that very relevant topic.
You do, like, so she's using Facebook to seek information about how to not use Facebook, or is that the intended irony? Did she intend the irony? Also, and let's see. If you read some of the comments, like, it's mostly people begging her not to go anywhere, and saying things like,
intention.
Like your fan page is associated with this account. Why don't you just delete the app? Don't actually jump.
I will be honest. I have stopped Facebook a couple of times and gone back on. Facebook is actually very upfront about how to do it. I feel like they are
they
like,
don't try to
hide here's a step-by-step way to do. I mean, the only issue is then you're like, well, I'm gonna lose a lot of my pictures. But there's apps you can get. There's like places you can go to download the photos, and so they're very forthcoming. But yeah, this kind of stuff kind of drives me crazy a little bit because I feel like it's really just an attention ploy. I can't tell you how many times I've heard comedians or something be like, "I'm out of here, guys," and then they're like, "All right, I'll come back."
All right, so here's my question:
go.
if she were to, maybe she is I think she was legitimately concerned about the up and down of her moods based on what, some people are just like, get me out of here. Like, this is not healthy for me. And what would happen if she deleted her account? Not that you know everything about Facebook, Jake, because he's not really on Facebook. I think he updated his profile picture once in 2014 or something. But I thought
it was a different color.
If you deleted your account, would every comment that you had ever made disappear?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Everything basically your account's gone.
It's like what happens to Hong Kong dissidents once they get to mainland China.
You know what I have found that's really helped me with Facebook really is that Jake, I saw you raise your hand, but I'm going to ignore you.
No, please go.
He was being polite and he gets dissed for
He's
it.
a well-raised child.
Is that I unfollow people. So I just unfollow most people unless I want to like see what they wrote. And then that way it's like, okay, because I have like comedians on there and people that it's like, I don't need to know what you have to say. And so I think that like that really helped me kind of keep my sanity.
Yeah, I think it's important to customize your Facebook.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of people don't even know that you can. Like, they keep getting emails about Facebook. Why am I getting so many emails? You can go into Facebook and unclick those. It doesn't have to push in. But they're so afraid of it that they don't even want. I already hate it. I don't want to go there to do a thing that would make me receive less of it. So.
Yeah.
But I want to know from Jake and Danny, because you're both not on Facebook, what's the societal pushback to that choice? Do you hear every day from someone saying, well, if you were on Facebook, sometimes people do it in sort of a
Not with that
condescending tone. Like, you would see what Barbara's daughter looked like on her first day of college, Danny, if you were on Facebook.
My dad gets that all the time because he has he has family that lives in the East Coast, and he's like, "Oh, send me photos." And they're like, "We don't do photos anymore. We do Facebook."
Right. That's probably a bigger issue for like the older generation. I think in Jake's case, and correct me if I'm wrong, most people his age are just like not that active on Facebook.
Yeah, Twitter and Instagram are my nephews. That's what.
Yeah.
Probably some other thing I don't know.
I actually spend more time on Instagram now than I do any other social media platform.
What I do get is not the condescending thing, but it's usually, you'd really like this about Facebook. Oh, the thing you just sent me, that email, that would be so cool. You'd love Facebook. So they're trying to encourage me. And plus, I do end up missing stuff. And I go, how did everybody know that? It was on Facebook. So I'm going to be the last guy in, probably.
Yeah, you'll get there. But
I got to
right
MySpace.
Before they closed the door.
On MySpace, there was nobody there when I got there.
Really?
You missed some really good times.
So, Jake, you're on Facebook, but there's nothing about it that grabs you. But you're also not on any other form of social media. And for someone who's so interested in tech, do you just don't need the social part of it that other people are drawn to?
Well, I mean, the one thing that Facebook had was group chats. It was very good at that. Everyone had it. And there was a lot of pressure to use it because everyone was on Facebook to some degree. So if you wanted to reach someone and not even if you were Facebook friends, but if you were friends of friends of friends, you could message them and get them. That was basically the one asset they had. But then they kind of to some degree lost that because everyone my age hates them. So it's
hates
not
them.
really,
Hates who? Them.
Facebook.
Hates
Oh,
Facebook.
Facebook.
Everyone hates Facebook.
Why?
So we all resent Facebook for being one, where the old people are. But two, we don't like any time that there's any kind of data thing, any kind of there's kind of like, oh, this is trying to manipulate you or this is kind of like that. And by the time a company has gotten big enough to basically try to manipulate you and use your data for things, it's already not cool among young people anyway. So I'm very lucky that Facebook has gone out of fashion and that basically every group chat I was missing out on has now moved to Signal. So I now can message all my friends.
So
securely.
Facebook has become Facelift Book.
A lot of Jake, it seems like a lot of younger people like Gen Z and maybe younger millennials are on Leftbook and they use Facebook groups and there's a whole culture associated with that. So, I mean, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I know for a fact that there are many Facebook groups during my college years that would have been very beneficial or made me more in tune with greater culture of my school. I know that there's lots of meme pages that only exist on Facebook because there's not really a platform for them otherwise, which lots of parts of Facebook, the part that I found the most important, like group chats, are being implemented elsewhere and people can leave, but there's still not really a great replacement for these small groups of maybe 200 people who are all posting nonsense every day. And without a really good alternative, we can't leave. So I think it's not necessarily that I dislike the social aspect of tech, but that I'm waiting for things that don't try to use my data to exist, right? Like, it's not Zuckerberg can read everything I do in order for me to say something online. And as more things get replaced, I'll join more things if I think they're good.
You're also part of a group that can recognize these things and go to something different or create it if you want it, where the rest of us kind of have to make a choice or figure it out.
And that which brings me to the question before we close, Jake, what would you create that doesn't exist?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so the problem is that it exists. It's just not that good. We've done it. People have created things a lot of times, which are basically the decentralized internet, where rather than, Amazon Web Services hosting these big server rooms, wasting a bunch of energy to try to make sure that if I want to see someone's post, it loads instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
If we all accepted that the internet was going to be a little slower and we had to some degree, carry our own weight, right? We want these things for free. We want services to work instantaneously. If we all just kind of culturally agreed, it's okay if my websites load a little slower. And it's also okay if some of my device's bandwidth, some of its computational power is used to keep the system running. There are decentralized approaches where when I like a meme, I don't just see it. My phone then sends it to people who want it in the future. And this would not just create an internet where people are more in charge of the content instead of corporations, but it would also be harder to censor, and it would also be more like ecologically sound.
So decentralization is
giant servers just churning.
I see.
That's a lot all at once. But
to circle back to the topic that we started with, Jake, do you think that ethical hacking is sort of like the precursor of maybe something like that, where it shows that there's a generation of people that are like willing to make sacrifices or like have a different relationship with the internet that will eventually benefit everyone?
I think that tech literacy among young people is what's gonna. Someone mentioned that people my age are more likely to jump around between a bunch of different services, and I think that that's hugely important in terms of being able to replace these giant corporations that are basically performing a public service. Right? Twitter is just kind of the public forum everyone can scream in, right? And it's important that we have that as a society, but it's also kind of weird that a company runs it. And I think that definitely young people and their tech literacy and our ability to move between varying services is going to help basically provide better platforms for people.
I love it. Thank you so much. Let's wrap up there, Jake. Very well said. We are Things I Found Online. Our producer is Dina Friedman. Our tech team is Michael Tellup, Connor Eldridge, and Devin Fay. Our sound mixer is John Maddox. Our webmaster is Bill Filipiak. I am Louise Palanker. Did I thank Danny Mann?
Yay.
Did I thank Dina Friedman?
Yay.
And did I thank Lori Rockingham? I want to make sure I do that. We will be dark for a couple of weeks as I journey to Australia for Ben and Nikki's wedding.
Oh, yay!
See you upon my return. Be safe, be well, be kind. Bye-bye.